Wake up, Twins territory, and welcome to another episode of Hangout and Talk Twins, also known as Twins Hangouts. I'm Jeremy Nygaard, joined live by Mr. Seth Stowes, the guy that's always on the radio. And we're going to talk today about the news that we've been waiting for quite a while, the news that I promised would happen like a month ago, and that is the hiring of the 13th, I believe, manager of the Minnesota Twins. The news kind of broke over the weekend. I think it was Saturday morning. Doogie had kind of alluded to news breaking at some point, and then Patrick Royce had confirmed the report that Meat Sauce actually had a couple weeks ago, and that was that Paul Molitor would be the new head coach, or I guess we'll call him the manager of the Minnesota Twins. News conference was today at 10 a.m. Seth got a chance to listen to that in its entirety. I heard most of it, what was broadcast on KFan anyway, and we're just going to talk about our thoughts, what we expect to happen next, and things like that. Seth, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I only had to work about a half a day because I took the morning off so that I wouldn't be interrupted by work-related things and could just sit and listen to the press conference, the questions afterwards. I think FSN did really well with it in that not only did they do the main press conference, but then they talked to Molitor and they talked to Terry Ryan, and then Joe Mauer and Glenn Perkins were also there and talked to them as well. So I thought it was a good 45 minutes or an hour that they were on live, and like I said, I was glad I was home to watch it rather than worrying about needing to answer a call at work or something like that.
Yeah, I had to go to the doctor, so I actually got a chance to listen to it because I was in my vehicle, and I heard uh, just what they did on KFan. It was about 25 minutes that they broadcast. So, what was your kind of overall impression of the not only the press conference but of Paul Molitor in general?
Um, you know, it sounds almost cliche, but the guy is impressive. And I think, whether people agree that he should have been named the manager, whether they think that he's, a new voice or just the same old, whatever it is, it's clear that one, he's smart, two, he's very well spoken, and three, he's very thoughtful and thinks very critically. I mean, he definitely was impressive in his answers. Um, and that isn't surprising. I thought the overall tone was obviously pretty positive, which it should be. Like I said, I think everyone really handled it pretty well. I mean, it is a tough scenario when you still got, Ron Gardenhire, who nobody wants to say anything bad about, but everyone acknowledges a change was needed. And, I thought it was just really well done.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because Dustin Morse talked, and then Terry Ryan talked, and then when they got ready to introduce him and the voice started, it was almost like I just expected to hear Gardy's voice. And it took me a little while to kind of wrap my brain around, oh, this is somebody different. And it was different. I mean, he is smart, he's well-spoken, he chooses his words very carefully. But yeah, the whole idea that this is just going to be another one of the Twins guys, I think that's mistaken. I'm really curious to see what the staff looks like, because I think that'll give us a better idea if there's a lot of holdovers from the old staff. But I think Molitor's going to have his own way of doing things. And, news came out already that he plans to use Santana at shortstop. Did you find that interesting that came out already?
Well, yeah, because more and more, especially with the Buxton scenario or situation with him having surgery now and likely not being able to do a whole lot until spring training, likely pushing his timeline back, I think it says a couple of things. They're sticking with Santana as their future shortstop, but it also tells me free agency, they're probably going to absolutely need to go get an outfielder. I guess in my mind, if I were to be creating my own blueprint, I'm to the point where I think I'd keep Santana in center and leave Escobar at short. But this coming out now, I mean, the timing of it really fits with, okay, this is what we've been hearing all along. But is that how it's going to play out when we get to February and March, and obviously most importantly April and May?
Right. So, I mean, well, let's come back to the free agents thing a little bit. If they're, obviously they're going to be looking at them, but let's talk about. Okay, let me rewind first. The way that it sounded is that, and we'll never obviously know for sure, but it sounded like um, the person that really, really preferred Molitor was Jim Polad. Does that sound accurate?
I mean, I think that's how it's been portrayed. He downplayed that both on what was seen and in the interview following, that he was just a part, that he, put in his 2 cents about the guys, and at the end of the day, it was Terry Ryan who made the recommendation, which, I mean, I tend to agree. But I guess when the owner puts his 2 cents in, I don't know if that's worth the same amount as what anyone else says.
So, your impression is that Terry Ryan's choice was Paul Molitor too.
I think so. I think so. I'm not saying Jim Pohlad didn't have any say in that or his opinion didn't count. I do believe that at the end of the day, I think Terry Ryan decided that Paul Molitor was the best guy for the job. But that's just my opinion.
I guess my theory, and maybe this is completely off base. Um, my theory is that, and this is based on the fact that it sounded like Terry Ryan preferred Torey Lavallo, and it sounded like Polad was the one that made the call on uh, on Mulder. Is that maybe Terry Ryan doesn't have all the power that we've kind of always assumed that he had? Maybe there's been kind of a shift in who's going to make that final call, and that's probably completely off base. But part of me wonders if for as much as everybody seems to like Minkiewicz, if Molitor is going to be a long-term manager, or if this is something that he's going to eventually see himself moving up the chain and becoming the general manager. Do you think that's fair or far-fetched?
That Molitor could be the next GM?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, and getting this experience as a manager would certainly help his resume for that over time. Um, that said, I kind of heard all the stuff about Ryan favoriting Lavallo, and I don't know that was ever proven or a fact, as much as we do know that, or we have heard that Lavallo really did well in the interviews, and clearly him just being around to this point says that he was very impressive. I don't know if maybe we made too much out of that, or I don't even know who the we is, but I don't know that Paul Molitor wasn't the favorite of Ryan's either. I don't know how we'd ever find that out. We won't find that out, I'm sure. One thing you mentioned, the Ryan not necessarily having all of the power. I mean, I noticed during the press conference at one point there was a question about payroll, which of course there always is, and Ryan answered it as he typically does, and he brought up the Kendrys Morales signing and some other things like that. And actually, Polad stopped him at one point and said, "Well, that's not entirely true." And he kind of, I guess he didn't call him out as much as he just kind of corrected him and said basically that there's been money on the table that Terry chose not to spend for whatever reason, and that reason being he didn't think that it was the right baseball decision. And so, I mean, it wasn't like he was disagreeing with Terry Ryan. He was just saying, you know what, payroll is just an excuse, and we're not really using that, and the money is there for him to spend. But I thought it was interesting that Polad really made a point to highlight that, and to me that showed, you know what, he's taking a vocal stand there, and kind of I don't know if putting Ryan in his place is the right way to say it, but it was something that stood out to me, and maybe I'm the only one, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Did Terry Ryan have did he say anything in response to that or not?
No, it just went to the next question.
Huh. That's interesting. Uh, What was said during the press conference about Molitor assembling a staff?
I mean, a lot of what we've said to this point, or what we've heard to this point, which is, as Terry Ryan told Parker when he interviewed him for the offseason handbook 3-4 weeks ago, um, it's not just going to be Molitor, but Molitor is going to have a huge influence on that. In fact, he said, it would be unfair to Paul Molitor to not have him be a key component in that discussion, but it can't just be a unilateral decision. Molitor basically said, you know what, and I thought, again, this is another example of him answering a question really well. He goes, I haven't been a manager, and I know my strengths, but I also know the areas where I need help. And I
Right.
think that's so important for a manager and for a leader. And those are the areas where he may focus on bringing some people in. And honestly, having that seventh coach, I think, is important in this type of scenario. And it doesn't answer the question. They basically said even already this afternoon they're going to start making some of their wish lists or candidate names and things like that, and try to make some decisions even later this week.
Did you see that one name that has come up is Cito Gaston?
Well, I mean, the only time it actually came up in the conference, in the press conference that I heard, was when they were talking about how he has played for some very good managers, and he mentioned the guys in Milwaukee, mentioned Gaston in Toronto, and mentioned Kelly here. But I guess I haven't seen it, and maybe I just missed it on Twitter. But I mean, it's just a name who has been an influence on his career.
Right. I don't know if it was a tweet of Doogie's or who, but I know that I saw that connected, and it was something along the lines of, "But would he be interested?" Um, I'm looking right now. He'll be 71 by opening day, but he did manage um, as recently as 2010 for the Blue Jays. So he's a name. He was obviously the guy that managed Toronto when Molitor played there. Do you think there's any chance that Steinbach could return in that capacity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had assumed that he would return as the bench coach, in part because we never did hear his name as a candidate for any of the managerial jobs, and I think that surprised us. And with Molitor there, I think there is a connection there. There's a long time relationship there, and obviously everybody seemed to like Steinbach as a baseball person, as a guy who works with catchers. But the fact that he's been so quiet and so just completely out of the discussion, makes you wonder what direction they would go on a bench coach. And in reality, you now have two bench coaches, the bench coach and then that seventh coach who is kind of a bench coach too. So you could go on any number of directions with that. It could be a former manager like Gaston, or as John kind of asked in the Twins Daily forums, would Tom Kelly, who obviously has a ton of respect for Paul Molitor, be willing to come back as a bench coach, as a guy to kind of mentor um, Paul Molitor through his first year at least? I personally don't see Kelly wanting to do the 162 game grind. Um, but I don't know. What do you think about it? What do you think about the bench coach position?
Well, this is just a conversation on Twitter that happened after the press conference. Doogie had tweeted, just leaving my other gathering, my out-of-the-box takeaway, Minnesota Twins were super impressed by Lavallo. Great mystery how he's not a manager. And then Nick Callow responded, didn't get to hear it. Any news on his coaching staff yet? And Doogie said, not yet. Believe it will be a mix of current and outsiders. Gaston's name floated as bench coach. So that's where I saw that. Um, Tom Kelly was another name that popped into my mind, but he just had a stroke, and I don't know if he would, all the traveling. Um, and then I thought, how crazy would it be if Gardy was on a staff?
That would be pretty crazy.
It would be, but something that I could totally see happening. I don't think it will. I don't think it will. But that would just be like the are you kidding me? People would go crazy, and I think that's probably why it wouldn't happen. But if you bring Steinbach back as a bench coach, or even if it's not as a bench coach, if maybe it is, I think when you like what you said, when Mulder said, "I know what I need help with." Don't you think that's getting a guy that has some experience as a manager?
I think it could be. I don't think that's a or should be a prerequisite. Um, I think there's a much better chance that Tom Kelly is the bench coach than Ron Gardenhire. But I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, Kirk Gibson could be an option for all we know. And you want someone. They talk about the advanced statistics. Well, the bench coach is pretty important in that, as the other coaches are. And who are some of those names that would fit into that category of former manager that is eager to look into that stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I guess for me, it was looking at who he maybe played with, who he played under. It's just the umbrella is so huge that it's really impossible to say, well, I think this guy, and obviously Cito Gaston's an easy name because it was a manager of his, and how many managers did he have? I don't. There was two. They listed two guys that managed the Brewers, one guy that managed the Blue Jays, and then one guy that managed the Twins. So I mean, there's not a lot of options there. But then who did he play with? I know you had brought up Robin Yount's name last week on Twitter, but it sounds like he doesn't really have interest in doing it. Um, what other guys? I guess the name I looked up was Dave Winfield, but it doesn't look like he really has. He's a special assistant to the GM, I think, for like the Padres. Um, are there other? I mean, are there obvious names? Could it be a guy that pitched pitched on a uh, on a staff that Molitor played for? Something like that. I guess all of those things are questions that will hopefully be answered
Yeah,
at
I
some
mean,
point.
it's easy to try to make those connections, and that's what we did when trying to come up with names. I mean, the Chip Hale name is one that's come up in the past. Plus, there is a tie to the Twins. I mean, it's always nice to have a connection to either the Twins or now to Paul Molitor. But the reality is, Paul Molitor probably knows pretty much everyone in baseball, and he knows a ton of Hall of Famers, and whoever he wants or whoever they want, he's going to be able to go to them and say, hey, will you at least think about it, for whatever position that is. I mean, if you want a pitching coach, and Mike Maddox is obviously staying with the Rangers now, that came out, over the weekend too. What about Greg Maddox? He's always been interested in coaching and helped his brother to some degree. I would certainly think Paul Molitor would be able to go up to Maddox as a fellow Hall of Famer and say, hey, I'm looking for a pitching coach. What do you think? Well, I mean, making those guesses, it's kind of impossible. But and I'm not saying Greg Maddox is an option. I'm just saying that if anyone is an option, Paul Molitor is probably the type of person with his background and with his personality that's going to at least be able to get them engaged in that discussion.
Um, you mentioned Greg Maddox. Burt Blyleven has said previously that he would like to be a pitching coach. Jack Morris, I think, was quoted today as saying something along those lines. There was one other name that I was thinking of. The one name I was just see if we're on the same page here. I'm thinking Blue Jays. Who would have been a pitcher on the staff when Paul Molitor pitched for the Blue Jays in the '90s? I can only come up with one guy.
Jack Morris,
Okay,
Juan
come up with it.
Guzman, Pat
Not
Henkin.
that's the guy that I was thinking of. So I'm like, I wonder what Pat Hennigan's doing nowadays. He's actually he was a bullpen coach under John Farrell for the Blue Jays in 2011, and stepped down due to family reasons at the end of the season. and was again the bullpen coach in 2013, but is being replaced this year, and he's continuing in the organization. Um,
Which
you know
organization?
the
Toronto?
the Blue Jays organization, but I mean,
Okay.
and he's a Midwest guy. He was born in Detroit, um, but I mean that's just another name that, and we could probably come up with 100. We could come up with way more than 100 names of guys like that. So maybe we just throw a lot of them
Right.
out randomly because then if one of those guys is announced as the pitching coach, it's like, yeah, well, we said that.
Right, and the name that seems most obvious to me for pitching coach is Frank Viola, who, of course, a lot of people will say, well, that's just picking another former Twin. Well, he hasn't had anything to do with the Twins organization in 25 years, at least, since they traded him in what, 88 or 89? I think 88. But at the same time, like he's been at Twins Fest the last few years, or at least a couple years ago. I remember seeing him, and it's not like there's a bad relationship. I heard today too on one of the radio things that I did that he couldn't really say anything about his interest in the job until recently, and I think it might have been until the calendar changed to November, at which point he's basically said, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in a major league pitching coach job. So the concern, of course, with him is he just had heart surgery last April.
Right.
So, is he going to want to do that? I mean, I'm sure he wants to, but how does that, factor into it and stuff? So, I mean, like you said, we could go through a baseball reference at every player that Paul Molitor ever played with. You could probably go with everyone that he played against. You could go anyone that's in the Hall of Fame, anyone that's a former Gopher, maybe everyone that he ever had dinner with, or anyone that's related to someone that's related to. I mean, it's an interesting situation, and it's just impossible. And then you look at the internal candidates too. I mean, Bobby Cuellar is a guy that's been credited with helping Johan Santana and Pedro Martinez. That's a pretty good resume. But
Right.
then again, what's he done for the last 2 years in terms of bringing players up into that spotlight? Um, you know, Marty Mason is a guy that became the pitching coach in Rochester 2 years ago after spending big league time coaching with the Cardinals and other organizations. And from all reports I've heard, he's been really well received there. Stu Clyburn at Double A has been in the organization forever. Ivan Arteaga, he's coached at different levels, but he's been in the organization for probably a dozen years or more, and he comes from Venezuela. So I mean, there's good inside people as well.
And that doesn't even include like Eric Rasmussen. Is he still in the organization right now?
Yeah, he's the minor league pitching coordinator, so that's
And
that's an option.
and then Rick Knapp, who I believe was in that role before he went to the Tigers.
Yep.
So I mean, we can come up with more names and more names. The only other name, and I don't know where I saw it, um, that was attached to the pitching coach job was Carl Willis, who I
Oh,
had not
sure.
heard of. He actually played for the Twins
91.
and was the pitching coach for the Mariners when Molitor was on the staff there, and was the pitching coach in Seattle when Sabathia. No, he was pitching
In
coach in
Cleveland.
Cleveland
Yeah.
when Sabathia and Cliff Lee won their Cy Youngs, and then in Seattle when Felix Hernandez won his. So that was just another name that popped up.
Oh,
But yeah, he was part of the
that's
World Series team in '91.
that's a great name. I mean, the Big Train has been pitching coach for a long time, and I think we'd agree that when it comes to priority or most important hire, it might be the pitching coach job because that's what they need the most. And frankly, for a manager that's never dealt with this year round, he needs probably a pitching coach that has been around making pitching changes, doing what's done in between starts. Not that Molitor doesn't know that, but it'd be really good for him to have someone who's done that before. So Willis is a great name.
Is that your new favorite?
It might be.
See, now I felt like I shouldn't say any more names after you said we could throw out all the names, so now I'm glad I threw that one out.
No, that's a good one.
Okay, so pitching coach, bench coach. I guess those are the two that are the biggest to me.
But here's another one. I mean, bench coach Sam Perlazzo just came into the organization. He has been a manager in the big leagues before. So if people are out there thinking, it would be nice for him to have someone who's actually managed right there with him on the bench, Perlazo's a good option too. And Gene Glenn's a name I think that would come up.
I think Gene Glenn will definitely be on the staff.
I agree.
I think that's one that I'd feel pretty good writing that one in pen. I don't know where though. Probably third base coach.
Yeah, I mean, he could be anywhere from third base coach, and with his analytical eye, with all the scouting that he did in the Rays organization, he's not necessarily a guy you wouldn't mind being on the bench or at third where he's been in the big leagues for a long time. I mean,
Right.
I think both you and I would agree, though, if we had to put money on a coach that will be within the coaching staff, I think we'd both put money on Tom Bernansky.
Oh yeah. I, for me, that's a done deal.
I would agree.
Um, Obviously, I would say that the hitting coach is pretty important, but I just feel like Bruno's he's gonna be back. Um, and for me, that's the only one that I really think has a more than 50% chance of guys that were on the staff. I'd say Vavra and Scotty Alger. Who am I missing? Those two they're gone.
Yeah,
Larry,
I mean, Rick Anderson.
Anderson's gone. Right. But then that still leaves. I mean, that leaves a bunch of spots. But
Right.
like you said, we could come up with a whole bunch of names. But Gene Glenn, I think, is definitely going to be. He's going to be up now. What does that do to the shuffle organizationally? Does the Smith that's in Double A right now? It sounds like he wants to be back in Fort Myers.
I don't know. I haven't heard that.
Berardino tweeted that a couple days ago that he's from Naples and he would prefer to be coaching closer to his Naples home and that the Twins are likely to accommodate him,
Okay.
which now opens up Double A and Triple A for Mankiewicz.
Right.
Or does it open up for Mauer to move up and for Watkins to step in and now be Cedar Rapids' new manager?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see a scenario. I mean, I think we've just made an assumption on Minkiewicz to Chattanooga, in part because of the interview he had with Patrick Royce 4 or 5 weeks ago, where he talked about the Southern League still being pretty close and Jacksonville, having an affiliate there as well. But Rochester's an option for him. I like what you're thinking there. Jake Mauer could definitely move up into one of those teams as well. I think they have enough confidence in him to move up. And we've talked about that several times as far as Tommy Watkins getting an opportunity to manage. I think he's put in his time, and that's what he wants to do. And in time, I think that's the right thing. The one thing I'd like to just throw out there too is they did get rid of Bill Springman as the minor league hitting coordinator, and we haven't heard of that being replaced at this point. I mean, I'd definitely like to throw Joe Vavra's name into that if he's interested in staying in the organization. And I don't know, with two sons playing in the minor leagues, maybe he would rather just watch and follow them. But, it's also possible, let's not forget, I know a lot of people didn't really like Vavra as a hitting coach, but he is the hitting coach that helped Torrey Hunter, Michael Kadire, Joe Mauer, Justin Morneau to batting titles, MVPs, all of that. Now, that's not to say those guys wouldn't have been pretty good hitters no matter who, but I also think Vavra deserves a lot of credit. And frankly, a major league coach who does have that track record would be a pretty good guy to have being a minor league hitting instructor. So, if they're looking for names of guys that could do that, and they've probably already thought of it, and maybe they've even already filled it, but I think that would be a pretty good name, and he'd have a great resume for that job.
What about anybody else that's in the organization or that's been, I think Eddie Guardado, he's helped out at some spring training. I always think like Rod Carew and Tony Oliva do you think they're just age-wise past being able to, I think wasn't Rod Carew a hitting coach for the Angels at one point?
No, he was with like the Brewers for a while, and I think he was with Seattle as well.
It shows on the Wikipedia page California Anaheim Angels 92 to 99, Brewers 2000 2001. I mean,
Okay.
is that he is 69, almost 70, but I mean that would be a guy that probably has some respect, a lot of respect, and he's, you know, he's what is he from Panama?
Yep.
I mean, so I mean you're getting into that, but it's like if he's already in the organization, is already helping out. I don't know. I mean, there's just so many names. But of course, we come back to the ones that we know that are familiar to the Twins. Um,
Right.
I'm really curious to
Oliva's a
see.
guy that Oliva's a guy that hasn't really actually been a coach in the organization since I think 1986 or 87. So I can't really see that. He's such a good ambassador, though, and he would be the kind of guy you'd like to see around a lot, but he already is around a lot, so I don't think they'd
Right,
necessarily go that direction.
and I mean he's 76 years old too. He's getting,
Right.
but yeah, it doesn't show anything about coaching on his Wikipedia page. But yeah, I'm just really I'm intrigued to see if there's a mixture of inside and outside, if there's a mixture of guys that have like Twins roots that have never managed or coached with the Twins, with guys that are completely outside, or if it's a deal where you look at Molitor's time in the Brewers, if he brings people over from that time. It's really intriguing. How do you think they'll announce it? Do you think it'll all be at once, or do you think it'll be piece by piece?
I think they'll announce it all at once, but my guess is we'll probably hear bits and pieces as they happen.
Yeah,
That's just kind of how it's come to fruition most of the time lately. You got great beat writer types like
exactly,
Mike Berardino. He's gonna get that information.
exactly. So what do we hear first? What's your guess?
I think the hitting coach thing is the most obvious. I think just from the quotes that we've heard from Brunansky and others. I mean, I just feel like that's a given.
Yeah, I would agree. So which one of the non-givens happens first?
Um, Boy, I mean, honestly, I mean, some of the other ones are kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say minor, but I think everyone's going to be obsessing so much about the pitching coach, and I think that's such an important one that I think we'll hear about that pretty quickly.
Like within a week?
Honestly, I would guess they will have a coaching staff within a week, and part of that's because one of the reasons they wanted to have a manager by today is today's the first day that teams can start talking dollars and negotiating with free agents from other organizations, and you have to have a manager, or how are you going to get guys to come play for a team that you don't know who's going to be your manager?
Right.
And the second part of that, of course, is for a pitcher, you'd certainly want to work with a pitching coach that you've respected and been able to talk to and get some opinions on, or vice versa. The same thing with hitters. So I think they want to do it. I would guess they'd want to do it pretty quickly.
Did you see the quote? I think it was from Perkins, where he said something about Molitor always had to stay in his lane, or was very careful to stay in his lane this year, but his lane just got a lot bigger.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that, but that's a good one.
I mean, and that's essentially what has happened. And and I don't know if there's truth to this, but was Molitor maybe offered the job in July of 2013?
I know that I've heard that, and I've also been told after we heard that there was no truth to that. So to be honest, I'm not exactly sure, but I tend to say that's not really the case.
And we probably would never know for sure, but something that I've heard is that um, Terry Ryan always pushed for Molitor to be on Gardy's staff, and Gardy always resisted that until finally this year, Gardy was not given the option.
Right. He had a little less, I don't know, backing to make his own decisions.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting couple of years when you just look at who took the fall the first time, and now it's wide open, and you have a lot of guys in limbo, and I think a lot of managers or coaches at least are under contract until the end of the calendar year. So we're waiting for a lot of these things to happen until December. Not that they'll drag out that long, but teams will need to get permission to talk to people, and you don't really want to talk to people until you have a manager in place.
Right. You know, one other thing from the press conference that kind of impressed me was someone asked Molitor about, all the young guys that he's worked with in the minor league system and their upside and their potential and how quickly they could come up and turn this thing around. And again, another very smart answer. It would have been easy for him to say, yeah, I've seen some talent, and hopefully they get up here and help us turn the table. And you and I are both minor league guys and are kind of in that mode that they've been building this system for a while and they should allow that to work. But Molitor very strongly said he wants to win right away next year, and there's no reason to not make that attempt and then hope that those minor leaguers do become what you hope they can become, and you just develop that winning attitude and you maintain it because of the minor league system. But to me, I thought that was a really good response, and that's what's been. I mean, that was kind of the overriding theme. You asked me that right away, and his quick-wittedness and his smart answers, not giving just the cookie-cutter answers, I thought was very impressive.
Yeah, he answered a lot of questions way differently, or maybe they weren't even questions, but when that was one of the first things he said is, I want to win games now. There's teams that can turn things around quickly. That goes exactly against what Terry Ryan and Dave St. Peter said in the last fan forum. It's the exact opposite. And that's the guy that all of a sudden has the avenue now to start talking and say, I expect more than 65, 70 wins. It's crazy, and I don't know that even realistically or there's any chance that the team can be all of a sudden a playoff team. But I think having the guy that's writing out the lineup card, if he believes it, there's a much better chance than if you're listening to the GM who says, yeah, we're still rebuilding, it's a slow process. So I'm glad that he said something like that. That's something Gardy would never say.
Right, and I mean, like I said, I just, a lot of people, and I want to kind of quote something too. Terry Ryan talked to smaller groups afterwards, and I know John Bonus was in on that, and I thought, asked some really good questions. And I mean, there were things about Madden and the conversations he had there, in the process in order to do that. And now I'm not going to be able to find that quote, but shoot, sorry about that.
Seriously, you built that all up, and then you.
I know, but honestly, I'm also not remembering what we were talking about, so that doesn't help.
Okay. Let's. Do you have any quotes that you want to talk about from the press conference, or should we move on to something different?
Well, I know that like John asked the question about Madden and Terry Ryan. John asked a question which I was kind of like, wow, that was kind of a brave question, but he basically said, everyone knew that Molitor was the front runner all along, and there is a section of the fan base that will say that the rest of it was all just a mirage that led to the obvious guy getting it at the end. And Ryan's comment to that, and I'll quote it here, was, I understand that because we came back around to the front runner in the fans' minds. Also, I would have taken a lot of criticism if I didn't explore the Madden situation, I think. I explored some other options outside the organizations that I thought were very worthy to talk to. I think it was the process was very thorough, and it's interesting that he said that. The part about I would have taken a lot of criticism if I didn't explore the Madden situation. And it's almost like he didn't realize just how big of a deal that was online when it came out. For some reason, I don't know why, that they never did talk to Madden, when guys like Lavelle and Doogie were saying, well, they did talk to him, so maybe they just hadn't yet. So, I mean, it's interesting how you kind of wonder how much they dig into what people are talking about.
Well, don't you think he said that because he did realize it?
Very possibly. That's very possible.
I mean, I think that's just kind of a way to jab the knife in a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's possible.
Because it's the media that made it a big deal.
Right.
So and Terry Ryan had made a comment about in Parker's interview too, about how he asked about the minor league guys, the minor league coaches that weren't renewed, and Terry Ryan said, "Well, that happens every year." And Parker, I don't know exactly how it went, but then the response was, "We got a couple of guys that got wind of it and then ran with it."
Right.
And you'd never hear that before. Almost, I
Right.
mean, a jab at the media doing their job, doing a good job, but it was almost a little jab that it was like, was that necessary? And
Yeah.
whether it was or not, I'm cool with it because I'm not in there asking the questions.
Right. And I kind of thought that same thing, but at the same time, he knows that it's their job, and I don't think he has a problem with it. I think his bigger point in that scenario was, we make changes frequently, throughout the minor league system where guys leave, and it just happens. People never really cared until we announced our new staff, and now we've got people that know this stuff ahead of time. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. The other thing, I don't know if people read it on Twins Daily. I got comments or quotes on Molitor from probably a dozen current or former major and minor league players, and I found it interesting that two pitchers that I talked to, Cole DeVries and Logan Darnell, both talked about how obviously Molitor didn't really work with pitchers as much, but in both of their cases, he had come to them telling them about how they were tipping their pitches. So I mean, that's the kind of mind or the types of things that he sees, even though it's not necessarily wasn't really his job so much, but he saw that still and made a point of it. So that's the kind of detail that I think is exciting about Molitor.
Right. Um, yeah. The I'm gonna cough here. The stuff that Plouffe said, that Dozier said, I mean Gibson, Perkins, they all were very, supportive of it. But I mean, what else are you gonna say? And I didn't read all the ones that you had, but I think that there's a lot of guys that are happy that the decision was made the way that it was.
Right.
Do we want to talk about free agency a little bit here before we call the show or
What
sign
would you like
off?
to talk about?
Well, we had mentioned that um, Mulder had said that he was thinking that he would use Santana at shortstop, which you had said opens a spot in the outfield. And last night, immediately after the chance to talk to free agents happened, Doogie had reported that the Twins had shown interest in Torrey Hunter, which I think is something worth talking about. Obviously, Hunter
Absolutely.
is 39, and he was a former Twin, and everybody loved him, and then he left and um, isn't as loved anymore. But you're talking about a guy that at 38 batted 286, had a 765 OPS, had 17 home runs for the seventh straight year. The year before, his first in Detroit was an All-Star, had 800 OPS, batted over 300 for the second consecutive year, and only the second time in his career. Um, is there a shot that he is back and finish his career as a Twin?
I think there's a shot. I think first of all he wants to go back to Detroit, and secondly he wants to go to a team that has a chance to win. and the Twins would have to convince them that they're not trying to rebuild next year, that they plan to do whatever it takes to get to the playoffs. And then obviously it comes down to money. The stat I think that you didn't mention, and he had an okay year offensively last year with Detroit. The thing that probably surprises most people is that he was the worst defensive right fielder in baseball last year, according to some metrics, which when you consider 8 years ago he was the best center fielder probably in baseball. Now he moves over to the corner and he's one of the worst corner outfielders. I mean, it's one of those things, and I tweeted this yesterday and got not a great response, but people talk about not liking that group of Guerrero and Kubel and Bartlett, and they're disappointed that the Twins would stay within the organization and keep Molitor instead of looking elsewhere. Are the same people that want Torrey Hunter to come back. So
Right.
I find that always interesting. And I'm not saying that, I mean, obviously Hunter played last year, but he's 39. I don't know what people think he's going to bring to the table other than, potentially punching teammates. I'm not saying it's a bad sign because, when I was doing a kind of a mini blueprint and kind of having those discussions for the offseason handbook, one of the things I wanted was a right-handed hitting outfielder to kind of team with Jordan Schaefer if they send Aaron Hicks down, or something like that, a right-handed one. So I mean, Hunter fits the category. I don't feel like he's the right guy at this time.
Well, you talked about how he was the worst by some metrics, and I'm looking at Baseball Reference, and his defensive WAR was minus 2.4, which is not good. Last year was minus 1.5. But as a Twin, from his first, 2001, he was 2.3 to the positive. 2002, when he was an All-Star and MVP number 6, finished 6th in the All-Star, won a Gold Glove. His defensive WAR was negative point 0.2. And then he was in the ones, 1.92, 1.1, won a Gold Glove in 2006 with his defensive WAR at 0. Won a Gold Glove in 2007 as an All-Star with his defensive WAR of point 0.2. And in 2008, his first with LA, won a Gold Glove with a WAR of minus 1/10. So, I mean, there's probably other metrics that continue to support that, but we knew how good defensively he was from watching him. And what I'm reading off those stats, they don't match up at all. Those aren't the stats of arguably the best center fielder in baseball. So I don't put a lot of stock yet into defensive metrics, because a lot of things, I was just reading one thing, about how much you put on the player, how much you put on the team. You never know where someone's placed because cameras don't allow that yet. So I mean, I didn't watch Hunter for Detroit, so I don't know how terrible he actually was. Maybe he was completely brutal, but defensively, I don't know what he'll end up being. Seth had to take a potty break. Maybe he's just not with me right now. So let's just go over potential free agent names. A name that keeps coming up, and I think it's coming up because Brandon Warren continues to bring it up, and that's Nori Aoki. Left-handed bat, throws right, Japanese. He is 32. He'll be 33 on opening day. Signed with the Brewers and was traded to the Royals, and this is third season. Very consistent throughout his first 3 years. Batting averages of 288, 286, 285. On-base percentages of 355, 356, and 349. Played in a career low 132 games this year and is a free agent. So he's a guy that could fit. Doesn't offer a lot of power. Career slugging percentage of 353. Had only one home run this year, but is a guy that's more likely to just put it on the ground and and beat a guy out. So maybe that's a name that comes up. He could play right field. He could play left field. Looks like the majority of his starts have come in right field, which is where we anticipate Oswaldo Arcia will be. So he's a name. Another name that is brought up in the event that the team would need a center fielder is Colby Rasmus, who's been, um, actually pretty brutal recently. Batting average of 225 this year, um, OPS of 287, which is atrocious, and has a slugging percentage of 448. So, um, that's another name. A name that was brought up in the Twins Daily Forum here is Jerry Sands. Jerry Sands was a fairly well-regarded prospect who's just been terrible. I mean, if you're taking a guy on like that, he's similar to what you took on Jordan Schaefer, where you're going to give a guy a chance and see what happens. Sands apparently was designated for assignment. If you have a spot, you can bring him in, but that's not a name that really does much for me at this point. Um, and I was a big Jerry Sands guy when he got brought up by the Dodgers. I actually picked him up in fantasy baseball like that night. Um, but other than that, I mean, you're looking at guys like Melky Cabrera, who will demand multi-year deal. Nelson Cruz, who apparently wants 4 years. Um, and you're not gonna see that happen. Soriano announced his retirement. Not that that really mattered. Um, there's just not a lot of names. So then, the one name that comes up in the if you've read the Twins Daily Offseason Handbook, Yasmani Tomas, uh, agent, but not necessarily somebody that maybe fits in the Twins budget. Would be an absolute splash if that's the way that they went, but um, I just don't see that happening. There are other Cubans that are available, but spending that sort of money to get one of those guys uh, would not be something that we'll likely see. I think we have Seth back on the call here. Seth Stowes.
Hello.
Hey, welcome back.
Thanks. Sorry,
Uh,
everybody. My internet just went for too long.
while you were gone, I covered Torrey Hunter.
Oh, good.
Um,
As you can tell, I love talking about him.
yep, but then I covered the other possibilities that could sign, and the two names that I brought up were Nori Aoki and Colby Rasmus. And then I started to poke fun at the Twins Daily Blueprinters for suggesting that the Twins sign Yasmani Tomas.
You don't think that's realistic, huh?
I don't think that's even close to realistic. Do you think it's realistic?
No,
Because you signed off on that.
I know. But here's the thought: you can give a 31-year-old or 32-year-old a ton of money, and they'll get hurt most likely. At least with Tomas and going that direction, you're getting a younger guy, and you're going to pay him a bunch through his good years. So I'd rather they do that. I just don't think they will.
Right. The concern with Tomas is that he's very much full of swing and miss. Like, big time. So, I mean, would you give 6 years and 105 million to Oswaldo Arcia right now?
I would not.
That's kind of what you might be getting with him.
Right, but he's going to get, I mean, if not that, he'll get say 6 years and 75 million from somebody.
Right. And that's one thing, but I mean, to break 100 million, he's got a ton of power. And playing in target field, especially as a right-hander in a lineup with Sano, with probably Arcia in between and having Vargas on one end, it would be a ton of fun. Don't get me wrong, but jeepers, I don't know how how that happens. MLB Trade Rumors projects 7 years, 105 million.
That's what they projected for him?
Yeah, 7
Wow.
years, 105.
We put a pretty good number in there then.
Which is, I mean, it's 15 million a year. I just think that's so much. And
Right.
what teams are in on him most right now? I've heard the Phillies.
Red Sox,
Well, the Red Sox
Marlins.
weren't, and then they had like a surprise. We're working them out. The
Right.
Marlins should be in on every Cuban because it'd be silly not to be. But I don't know. That was just one to me that didn't make a lot of sense. You guys are usually pretty realistic about things, and I saw that and I was like, "Well, what the heck?"
You got to give people something to talk about. Justin Masterson's not all that exciting.
Yeah,
Colby
but still,
Rasmussen isn't very exciting. He's not even very good.
no, that's absolutely the truth. Um, not that it's even related to the Twins in their outfield, but did you see that the Angels signed a Cuban infielder for an $8 million bonus?
No.
And it sounds like he's a 20-year-old, so he fits under the signing pool stuff, and they're subjecting themselves to a 100% luxury tax on the bonus. So they had $2.3 million in their bonus pool. So really, that $8 million is like almost $14 million.
Wow. And could they lose a draft pick?
They won't lose any draft picks, but they can't sign anybody for more than 300,000 in the next two international signing periods.
Wow.
Because he's a Cuban, so it's the international stuff, not the draft pool.
Is there any possibility the Angels just didn't realize that he was under that pool?
Absolutely not. They had to have known.
Yeah. Right.
And that's the thing. It's like the teams that go over, they'll pay the tax, but if you've already gone over and you've got your guys, it's no big deal. So if that new stud, that new Cuban that just got out of Cuba the other day, if he shows up somewhere and he's a free agent before the end of June, the teams that have all went over their bonus pools, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Rays, I think are the three. They could spend, 100 million and get the guy if they wanted to, but if it goes into July, they can't sign him at all because they're limited to the 300,000. So it's going to be a very interesting time. But to see a 20-year-old get a $8 million signing bonus, that's just crazy.
I agree.
All right. Is there anything else we want to talk about? We've been rolling for an hour.
I just had a couple of things. We kind of briefly touched on the Byron Buxton thing, and honestly, I kind of think that almost pushes him back to 2016 or at least September of 2015 before we'll see him. Even if he comes back at 100%, he's going to have to shake some rust off, and I think we'll see him in a little bit. He did have surgery, and I know people want to blame the Twins medical staff or Arizona Fall League medical staff, but I mean, there's so many bones in the hand that a regular X-ray didn't show it. They had to go to a hand specialist who took care of it. So I mean, there's really no blame, I don't think, in that scenario.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
The other thing, the Fall Stars game was over the weekend, and Eddie Rosario started in left field, went 0 for 2 with a walk. I think he made a really nice play out in left field and showed off his arm on a double play, getting a guy at second. And then Jake Reed pitched a scoreless inning. He did give up a bloop single, kind of between short and center field. But again, very impressive. The thing that impressed me, and I think you watched it too, everything he throws moves a ton. And that's what Jason Kanzler told us a couple of weeks ago. But to be watching it on TV and to see the movement he gets on those pitches, I mean, it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's a good player.
No question. The Twins were shut out in terms of not only Gold Gloves and baseball defense Bible stuff, which shouldn't surprise us. But did you find it interesting that in the Players' Choice Awards, Danny Santana was one of the American League top rookies, along with Jose Abreu, who won it? But when today the Baseball Writers Award nominees came out, he was not in the top three.
And instead, who was?
Dellin Betances, which
Seriously?
is kind of hard to argue with too, because he was amazing. But I don't know. So yeah, we talked about the Twins uniforms. I didn't realize this. This is pretty random. I tweeted it today when I read that Tyler Rogers is a right-handed submarine pitcher in the Giants system who basically what the report was that his knuckles are pretty much hitting the mound. What's interesting is then he's the twin brother of Twins left-handed pitcher Taylor Rogers, who is left-handed and throws pretty much straight over the top. So I just found that funny.
Is that actually the truth? I didn't know if you were BSing or if you were telling the truth.
That they're twin brothers?
Yeah.
That's absolutely the truth. If you would have read last year's Twins Prospect Handbook story on Taylor Rogers, you would have found that out.
Maybe I did know. I just felt like I didn't know that.
By the way, for those that aren't aware, Jeremy helps write the thing, so
I didn't write that story.
No, I did, but
I'm sure I read it, but I just when I saw your tweet today, I was like, "Is that true?" I can't know everything.
I remember reading it, and I remember writing that in the article because he and I talked about it. But even before I tweeted it, I did go to Baseball Reference and found that they do have the same birthday, and they were born in the same city, and so I was pretty sure at that point.
That would typically suggest that.
Right.
There's just so many minor leaguers, and I try to know everything about every one of them, and sometimes facts that I read and know about then slip through my mind.
Have there been any? I mean, I know you and I and Cody Christie have been writing these minor league blurbs and scouting reports and backgrounds and things like that. Have you learned anything about anybody that you found interesting of late?
There was one guy, and I can't even think of who it was, but I'll figure it out. One of the draftees, Tyler Montner.
Yep, Buffalo.
I like him a lot more now than I did a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just by reading more stuff than I had, and he had been hurt at Buffalo, and then had come back to have a good season and went to a summer league. Actually, won the triple crown in the summer league, and showed a stronger arm than people had seen in Buffalo, and then had a decent season before he got drafted. But he was brutal in his debut, and I think he's a guy that I don't know what I expect out of him, but I feel like he's a better baseball player than I was giving him credit for. Stuff like that I find more interesting, or maybe just more helpful to me, because I try to get a better sense of these guys when they're younger than trying to figure them out when they're getting called up to the big leagues. How about you? Have any good stories?
I mean, not a ton, but you find just little things, and now as I asked you that and kind of put you on the spot, I sat there thinking, man, I should probably have a response for this. But for instance, like Blake Schmidt was a 26th round pick this year for the Twins out of Maryland, but he's a Minnesota kid. He played in the Legion World Series, and he was actually named like the Player of the Year in American Legion ball. And it's like, out of everybody in the whole country, and he's a 26th round pick and a utility guy, probably big picture, but little stuff like that is, I think, pretty cool.
Like when Randy Rosario could do a backflip.
Right. How exciting is that?
It's super exciting. I can't do one.
I can't either. I can't do a front flip.
but you could do it like a forward tumble if you needed to. I bet
If I had to, I probably could.
Josie could help you with that.
Yeah, we'll see.
Um, our tentative release date is early to mid December, right?
Yeah, I'd lean towards mid because I think we want to have everything done at the beginning and give ourselves a week to kind of make sure it looks good.
Right. Um, as far as other news, obviously we've been doing this every Tuesday night. Um, not real sure that this is going to continue. Obviously, that's been kind of announced on Twitter. We're gonna not plan on doing one next Tuesday night. Um, I guess from the very beginning, when you used to do your other blog talk radio, uh, and then you stopped, your message to me all the time when I would try to tell you that you should be doing a podcast was you're only going to do it if it was right. You're only going to do it right.
Right.
Um, and obviously, whatever we're doing is not right enough because I think the the audience that we hoped to gain um, just never really came around. So I think we're gonna just kind of take a hiatus. I would still like to do a the night before the 40-man rosters are due, the night before arbitration stuff has to be in. Um, Something with the winter meetings. I would still like to randomly do them, but I guess we're not sure going forward what's going on. So, um, at this point, listening to a Hangout on Tuesday Night Live or on iTunes Wednesday or Thursday, whenever you listen to it, this is going to be the last one uh, planned, unless Seth changed his mind over the last couple hours. And then you could try to convince me to change my mind too.
Well, I mean, let's be honest, and we're not trying to sound like we're complaining because obviously you've got anyone who's listening to this. There's several other twins related podcasts. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to and things like that. So, we understand, but we
Seth, I can't hear Seth anymore. That's kind of our key that maybe things just aren't working out very well. So let's see if we can get Seth back on for his monologue to close things up. Um, Not seeing a steady increase, and by steady increase I mean seeing a decrease in downloads over the last couple months has been kind of the icing on the cake. Um, I think draft time, um, we were getting some downloads and people were listening, and even live, I think, full disclosure for the draft, what I think it's one point we had 50, almost 60 people viewing live during the draft, and um, getting even a sixth of that has not been something that we've been doing consistently. Um, so that's kind of where we're at. I would like Seth to get on here and give us his final piece of. Okay, Seth's message to his listeners are: leave us lots of feedback to keep doing this, or we're just not going to. So if you made it to this point, um, he wants to hear lots of people tell us to keep doing it. Otherwise, we won't. And I think that's a fair way to end it. So obviously, big news today with Molitor being introduced. Um, the future is kind of our show anyway is kind of hanging in the balance. So We need people to tell us to keep doing it. Otherwise, it just doesn't really seem worth it. So, um, at that point, I'm going to sign off. Um, and thanks for spending the time listening to us to this point. Download us, leave us feedback, do all those good things, and have a wonderful Tuesday night. Or if you're listening later, Wednesday night. Thanks for hanging out.